I'm going to switch the word to 𝗕𝗏 𝗔𝗂𝗀, who is the managing partner of Oddball Digital, and he will tell you more, give a little bit an introduction to the session we are going to have, and also an introduction to Oddball. So voilà, 𝗕𝗏, the floor is yours.
Thank you, 𝗕𝗂𝗀, and thank you for setting up the environment so we can cooperate and show what the two companies can bring to the customers. Yes. My name is 𝗕𝗏. I'm responsible for Oddball Digital in the Gumption Group. We are focused on custom development, so we're a tech company. We already did a few projects together with Brightest to set up testing frameworks to ensure quality assurance for our customers. Our vision at Oddball Digital is that we... Can you switch to the next slide, please, 𝗕𝗂𝗀? Our vision is that we add value to the businesses by leveraging innovative and mature technology. So, of course, as a tech company, we follow the new trends and we like to experiment with those new trends. But if we need to build real-life applications for our customers, we definitely choose for mature technology. So we invest in innovation, but of course, if we need to build production-ready systems, we rely on mature technology. Our expertise, what do we do at Oddball Digital? Of course, we would like to help our customers in finding the right solutions for their problems. And that's why we start with the value discovery sessions that are creative sessions we set up to explore what is the exact problem the customer is trying to solve, which solutions are there already in the market, and because we are not going to reinvent the wheel. If we can integrate existing solutions, of course, we will suggest that to our customers. And during those value discovery sessions, we make examples by different business models of other companies in Belgium or companies abroad, to inspire and to connect all those ideas to get the pieces together to build innovative solutions. The next step is prototyping that solution. Instead of starting to build a complete application, we work with wireframes, high-level wireframes, low-fidelity wireframes in order to make things visual. We like to get things visual because everybody is going to use the application on a screen or at some sort of user interface. So that's why we use prototyping to validate the idea. It's not because the idea has been discovered in a meeting room that the idea is going to land at the users or at the customers of that specific company. After that, the prototyping has been validated, we start with the software design. Software design is the front end that is going to be designed, but also the application itself that is going to be architectured. And of course, in the end, we also develop the solution and maintain the solution after it went live. To focus on the case of today, so my colleague Christophe is going to give you a demo of an implementation with it for our customer 𝗲𝗏. 𝗲𝗏 is a digital marketing company that focuses on the sports sector. They have been working with a few marketing consultants in their team. They've been using Excel templates and all kinds of templates to get their work done. And then they started to encounter the issues that typically every company mentions after working with a few Excel files, that things are getting messed up. Several people are working on the same Excel file at the same time, and that doesn't work. So that's why they called us and they asked us to build a digital marketing platform. So we chose to develop a Flutter application that has been hosted on Firebase, Firestore database, in which we gather all the information about campaigns, about content that will be published on those marketing campaigns. And of course, as a digital marketing company, they have nicely set up templates and documents that they filled in by hand. And now that all the data is in the database, they ask us, is there a way to get those data in the same nice looking Google Docs and Google Sheets? So that's why we started exploring the Google Docs API and the Google Sheet API. My colleague Christoph is more technical than me. He can guide you through the mysteries of Google Docs.
Yes, indeed. Hello, everyone. I'm Christoph van den Broeke. I started in January as a full stack developer at Oddball Digital. I'm mostly focused on JavaScript frameworks and languages, and as Philippe mentioned, Flutter is one of them. And so the whole 𝗲𝗏 application has been built using Flutter. And yeah, as Philippe already mentioned, the question came to have the automated reports generated. And so as a demo today, we dive a bit deeper into the example of a Google Docs API, but we did a similar approach for Google Slides and Google Sheets, as Philippe already mentioned already. What we're going to see right now is a screen recording that I did yesterday, just to demonstrate a bit on a technical level how things were set up here with us at Oddball Digital and how it can work basically. So in this next part, we're going to give a small presentation on how to generate a Google document using the Google Docs API and Google Cloud Functions. So before we really dive into the 𝗲𝗏 application itself, we're going to take a look at the different tools that we are using for this specific task. And the first one is going to be an obvious one, is that we're using the Google Docs API. And right here, we have a list of all the possible requests that we can do towards the Google Docs API. The names of the specific of all the requests are pretty much self-explanatory. So for example, right here, we have the replace all texts request, which is basically going to replace one string with another one. Something really specific for the Google Docs API is something that we're going to see right here with the insert text request. So for example, if you take a closer look to this specific call, is that you can imagine that, yeah, we're going to place one specific string inside the document, which is going to be at a specific location. In order to define this location inside the document, we use something which is called an index, which is basically an integer with the exact location inside the document. How does this work in an actual document? I can show it to you right here. So for example, what we have right here is the template that we use in order to generate the styled document. And so for example, if we want to add something in the beginning of our document, we're going to place it right here, and it's going to be index 0. If we then move one step to the right, then that's going to be index 1 and so on. As you can already see inside this template, is that this template is already partially styled, and that's a really nice part, in fact. The reason why it's so useful is because a non-technical person from the company, for example, can already style the template inside using the how style, for example, without having to interfere with any of the existing code. If you take a look at the content of this specific template, we can see a lot of variables, such as the name of the campaign, the type of the campaign, and so on. The data can also be really different. So for example, the type of the campaign is going to be a string, but for example, the media budget is going to be a number. This is going to be a date, and so on. Okay, there are also some cooler ones that we're going to tackle later on. For example, is that you can add images, but we'll get to that later. And then finally, the third part that's relevant before we really get into the demonstration and the code is that we also use Google Cloud Functions. What is Google Cloud Functions? It's basically a serverless tool that's provided by Google. What does it mean is that instead of having to run your own server and maintaining it and so on, you can use Google Cloud Functions to let Google host a server for you, which you can then call using a trigger. So for example, in our case, the one that we're using right now is this one, which is our API, which is going to be a node server, which is running an Express application. If you take a closer look at the application itself, you're going to see that we're prompted with a login. I'm currently running the application on my local machine as a local host to make sure that we don't break anything or interfere with any production logic. What we have right here is a single sign-on tool by Google, which basically means that once you authenticate using your own Google account, you'll be giving access to multiple instances. So for example, right now, this is going to be really handy to let the user give access to, for example, their Google Drive or their Google Documents. If you actually sign in, you'll be prompted with the list of all your Google accounts on your machine, and I'll be logging in with my personal account. Right now, I'll be prompted with a warning, basically saying that this app hasn't been verified, which is because I'm running this on my local machine, and Google can't verify it on my local machine. But of course, when we're in production, this screen won't pop up for the user. If you continue on, then we'll be prompted with a list of all the possible accesses that one should give to Google, basically, or to the application. These three are checked as marked already because they are really necessary in order to verify yourself as being myself. And the other ones are the ones that are more interesting for this demonstration. They're basically all the required APIs that you need. As we see right here, we have things like Google Drive and Google Documents, which really are necessary for this demonstration. Once we log in, of course, we'll be inside the application as a whole. I'm not really going into detail in the application itself, so I'm just going to continue towards campaigns and pick one of my testing campaigns. So what we see right here is basically an overview of all the data that's relevant for a campaign inside the Mice Menu application. And right here we have a list of all the exports that we can do. The one that's relevant for us right now is the briefing content items, but we also export some other exports such as export tasks or export slides, which are going to generate either a Google spreadsheet or a Google slide presentation. Once we click on the briefing content document button, the API gets called in the back and the requests are sent to that. And once that API call is successful, we'll be prompted with a pop-up that contains a link towards our generated document. If we click on that, we'll be linked to our own personal drive. As you can see right here, I'm still logged in as with my own personal account. And we immediately see that it resembles a lot on the template that we saw earlier. All the styling that was defined in that specific template exists here as well. Just instead of having the variables right there, we have actual content. So as mentioned earlier, we see a lot of different data types. So for example, we see stuff as strings, as numbers, as dates, and so on. Here are some of the more cooler parts. So even if there's an image inside our Mice Menu application, we can link that image inside our document and add it here. Other than images, we can also generate tables. So these tables serve basically as an overview of all the channels that are relevant for one specific campaign. If you scroll down a bit, we also get like the detailed information of each specific channel visualized in a table. Okay, now to take a closer look at the actual code that makes this possible, I'm going to go to my Visual Studio Code. And right here, we're inside the root of our Google Cloud Functions. So what we're running right here is an express function that is going to expose an API. And the actual part that we want, of course, is going to be this specific route, the generate report route. And that's the one that is being called from inside the application itself. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to check for an access token. So basically, whenever a user logs in using their Google account, they'll generate an access token to really validate that they are in fact the user that they say they are. And we need that access token to access all the APIs later on. So when we know that the specific access token is also valid, then we can continue with the actual API call. What we do right here is basically some in-house logic. So here we check to see if all the actual headers, or all the data is available. So for example, what it means is that we have an ID of a company, an ID of a brand, and an ID of a campaign. Once these two checks are completed, then we will be fetching all the required data from outside the database. So that's why the specific IDs were needed, because if you don't have those, then we can't fetch all the correct data. So that's what we do right here. Once we have all the data fetched from outside the database, we can really get into this function, which is going to generate the document and add all the data to it. If you take a closer look at this specific method, the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to copy a file. What this does is basically going to copy the template that we discussed earlier, and it's going to give it a specific report name. The name that is sent to this specific method, we also see it right here. It's going to be this specific name, so it's going to be the name of the document as a whole. Then we also see the access token, which we discussed earlier. And over here we have the ID of our template that we discussed earlier. The next step, we're going to fetch all the content outside of the just freshly copied document. And the reason why we do that is, for example, if we want to add for example, a table at a specific index, we want to make sure that we always have the correct index from that point onwards. So that's why we fetch all the content outside of that document, so that we can make sure that it's added at the right place. Once we have that document, or the content of the document, I should say, we are going to create an array of all the possible requests that we are going to do. So what this array will contain is basically an array of all requests like these ones, basically. If we're going to take a closer look at this specific method, you'll see that we're going to loop through what we call a campaign. The campaign that's discussed right here is basically a JSON that we defined beforehand to really handle each variable inside the template correctly. So if you take a closer look inside this JSON, then we see all the variables returning that we saw inside the template itself. So for example, right here, we have an easy one, which is campaign.name, and that's basically going to replace it with the name of the campaign outside of the database. The nice thing about having this JSON is that we can also write some more custom logic. So for example, if we know that something is going to contain images, then we can add another key to it called type images, and then we can do some specific code for that edge case, basically. Okay. If we continue onwards, then we're just going to add each request to our array and then return it to our API. Now to take a closer look at this method, which is going to create a request similar to the ones that we see right here in the Google Docs API. And basically here we handle all the different scenarios that can happen inside the 𝗲𝗏 application. So as mentioned earlier, if we're dealing with a type of variable that is going to contain images, we're going to return a separate request that will handle the custom logic for handling images. Similar to that approach, if you know that a variable is going to contain dates, this will require some more custom logic, and that's why we do it in here. Similar approaches can be used later on. So for example, this is a bit more specific to the 𝗲𝗏 application, but we know that sometimes the data from the database can be an array that contains objects, and then we need to handle it perfectly so that we can create a correct overview. This specific one is used to generate the this table right here to really have an overview of all the channels for this specific campaign. If you take a closer look at the actual code right here, so this is really something that's specific for generating a table, and then you can get an idea of how things work. For example, right here, if you want to make sure that we create the correct amount of rows for to really contain all the data, then we, for example, check the length of the data that we sent, and then we have a correct overview of all the rows needed. And then finally, which is probably going to be the easiest request out there, is the replace all text one. So it's the final step inside my if check. And that's the scenario if it's just a string, for example, campaign.name that we need to replace. And then the request speaks a bit for itself, but we're looking for a specific key, which is going to be the key of right here, and then replace it with the actual value. The thing we do right here with the convert value is that it's a separate method that we do to make sure that the data is represented as a string. So if it's not represented as a string, then Google API will complain about it. So that's why, for example, if we see that the value is an array, we convert the whole array inside one big string, split it by new lines. If we see that the value is going to be a date, we convert it to a date object and then to a string date instead of having the timestamp there. And if it's neither of those, we just return the value as a string. Okay. Then if we go back into our index file, then we see here that we store the result of this method inside a new variable, which is still going to be an array, of course. One final thing to note, which really is a key part of handling with the Google Docs API, is that we reverse the array as a whole. Now, the reason that we do that is because we're dealing with indexes. So to demonstrate the reason behind it a bit is I can show you right here. So for example, you can imagine that, for example, if you want to add a string at this specific location, which is going to be at index 2, for example, if I type my name there, then I'm going to add 7 towards that index. So rather than being 2 as in beginning of my name, I'll be at index 9 over here. And you can imagine that if you want to add something on the next line, that might cause some problems because your index is no longer 2, but it's going to be something like 10. And it's going to be really messy to deal with that in terms of code because you'll have to update your index with each request that you make, basically. To tackle that a bit, we reverse the array as a whole. So for example, if I now add something here, again, I'm going to pick my name. This index is still going to be index 2, so it makes it easier to create a list of requests that you want to do because you don't really have to take the updated index into account. Okay, and then finally, which is the actual request towards Google themselves, is that we send the array containing all the requests to them, of course using our access token that we discussed earlier, and as well the ID of the copied document. Once that's done, we just send the link back to the application itself, and we're left with our newly generated styled document.
Okay, thank you, Christophe. The nice explanation. It was rather technical, so I don't know whether the candidates in the call here have any questions for Christophe.
Maybe Christophe, there is something you could show us. Maybe something which you didn't elaborate on during your demo, or maybe something related on how you validated this application.
What could maybe be interesting is that I also show the examples of the sheets and potentially the slides, just so you guys can get an idea as well of how that works.
Yes, thank you.
I'm just gonna set it up and then I'll take over.
Yes, perfect.
Meanwhile, are there people that used another way to generate documents out of data that's contained in a database?
I think at a previous customer we used 𝗕𝗂𝗃𝗃 to create some translatable fields.
And it's based on which technology? Because I don't know it.
I think it was called 𝗕𝗂𝗃𝗃. So that the fields that were translatable, they got an ID. That the ID could be spoken to in the code. Kind of similar.
Yeah, kind of tagging too. Yep.
Okay, I'm ready to share my screen.
Okay.
You guys can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so again, I'm in the detail of the campaign. And right here is the export part that we saw in the demonstration as well. So similar to that, I can also export my tasks, which is just one of the steps specific to this campaign. And again, UI-wise, it's going to be identical to what we saw earlier, but instead of having a Google document right now, we have a Google Sheet, which gives a more structured overview of all the tasks needed for this specific campaign. And then similar to that, which is still a bit ongoing, so this this isn't a final product still yet, but yeah, indeed. So it's going to be the slides. So what you saw a preview of that in the presentation of Philippe, where we were showing some slides, and now those slides are being given actual content. So we see the same slides returning here, where similar to what we did with the Google Docs API, is that we replace actual values outside with the data from inside the application. So content-wise, it's going to be very identical to the document that we saw earlier, but instead of having it in a Google Doc, it's all inside a Google slide, basically. And this also works dynamically. So this is like an overview of all the campaigns in the whole application. And so you also have like some tables that expand dynamically based on how much content there is, but I'm not sure if there's a good example. Yeah, so for example, right here, this is just one of the tables that just gets added with more tasks. If there are more than 10, for example, or so, it will create a new slide automatically with then another table. So yeah, that's a bit another nice way of using the Google Docs to generate some documents or slides or sheets. And this one is going to be similar to the task that we saw. So it's also a Google Sheet that just contains content items in this case.
I saw Yves has one question. He asks if Microsoft has a similar solution API and an additional question, why did you decide to use Google Docs?
Yeah. So I'm not sure about the Microsoft part. I haven't worked with the Word API or the Excel API. But I think if they expose an API that is capable of it, then it should also be possible. And the main reason why we chose for Google is, I think, mostly because there was also already the tool that we used to log in and that my Svenja used internally for all their documents, basically.
Yeah, the templates they were using were Google Sheets and Google Docs. So my Svenja uses Google G Suite for his mailing and file system. So that's why we chose for the Google implementation.
Yes, sounds logic. Okay, thanks for the question, Yves.
Indeed.
Okay.
And we also chose, or the customer chose to generate docs that can be edited afterwards. They didn't choose for PDFs. Because, normally when you generate reports, often you choose for PDF format. But this is really a briefing document. So that means that the briefing document is preparation for a briefing, and customer itself can add his own content in the document. And so that's why we chose to generate docs and not PDFs.
That makes it very flexible, yes. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you so much for showing us this presentation and this demo, Christophe, also. Here there's another question by Bjorn.
Okay.
I missed the part of the presentation, due doorbell. Can you add conditional formatting? Bjorn has some info probably.
Yes, you can. The way I did it is just because we are writing a JavaScript application, is have the conditions in the JavaScript code itself. So that's the way that I did it. I'm not sure if you also want conditional formatting in the doc itself, but I just use JavaScript basically to do my conditional formatting.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Bjorn? Thanks. Voila.
And what is nice too, that you can have different templates. Huh? So now we have one template for document, but of course, if more customers have access to the application, then 𝗲𝗏 can provide specific templates for each customer. So the documents are generated in the look and feel of each customer.
So you can add logos of your customers and stuff like that.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you so much for showing us this solution. Thanks again, Philippe and Christophe. And I hope to see everybody next time.
All right. Thanks for coming, everyone.